This is the Orleans Animal Control and Regulation Task Force meeting of February 24th. I'm calling it to order. We'll do the roll call just by saying our names out loud from Nate, counterclockwise.
Nathan Sears, Natural Resources, Orleans.
Bob Sinclair.
Carl Oakes.
Jen Siebert. Patty Platten.
Ed Bagonis.
All right. And tonight, Jennifer's going to clerk for us, and we're going to start right off with the chief's answers to the 10 questions that I posed to him. Are you comfortable up there? I mean, we could probably sit you down here.
Oh,
if
I'm
you're-
fine, Carl, thank
Yeah?
you.
Okay. All right, so how about if I read the question and then you take it from there? Is that okay?
Could I just have one moment before we begin? I just
Totally.
wanted to clarify something with you folks in terms of having a sit-down private meeting. I think it's fair to say that there may be some disagreement on the correct path moving forward on these issues. And, you know, I felt it very, very important to try to be as helpful as possible in this process, but also that it be done in a public forum. Sometimes written responses can be lost in translation, misinterpreted. That's why I just like to have a conversation. I thought our last conversation was a healthy one. It's a fantastic dialogue, and that's what I was hoping we could do again. So I certainly apologize if there was some confusion along the way, but I do truly feel in this open forum this is the best way to address the issues at hand. So with that,
My feeling is whatever works for you works for us because you're helping us out. So.
fantastic,
All
thank
right.
you.
So the first question was about dog issues overall, and I asked you, we heard you mention biting and barking as two dog-related issues you have to deal with. Is there anything else of significance from your perspective, either in terms of frequency or of occurrence or difficulty of managing? And also, can you say more about what sort of dog bite issues you encounter and how frequently?
I think a key word there is significant, and my response would be no, I don't think we have any significant issues. Clearly, anytime there's a bite, that's a serious issue, and we take it very seriously with regard to the way we investigate that. I think if we were to compare the number of bites that we receive with surrounding areas, surrounding towns, I think that would be very consistent. You know, I haven't gone out and collected the data and analyzed the data, but that's just my feeling. We just don't have a lot of that activity. We have it, but there's not a lot, and it's certainly not a significant problem.
How about, are we talking dog biting dog or dog biting human beings? How often did dogs bite human beings a year, would you say, and how serious are the bites?
Well, in this past year, and again, I don't have the specific stats in front of me right now, but I would say there was a handful of bites, maybe 3 to 5. One of them, very serious nature, which was very concerning to us at the police department, and that matter was brought to the Board of Selectmen for additional action.
And can you tell us anything about the context of these bites? Like, is this happening in domestic settings or walking settings? Or-
From time to time, a little of both. We've had cases where we had guests at a private residence, and the animal that resided in that residence bit the guest. Nothing severe, but, you know, punctured the skin, something that we would investigate. The more severe incident that we investigated a few months ago happened at Kent's Point. And I'm not sure if you folks have discussed that or are familiar, but it was a very severe situation.
Are you talking about something more recently than the 2018?
Maybe it was 2018.
Yeah. No, 2018 is where the gentleman was, and the 2 boxers. Yeah. I don't mean to hog the questions, by the way, folks, so I'm not going to move us on until everybody's had a chance to ask. But how, per year, would you hazard a guess as to how often you have the scenario of unrestrained dog being walked outside biting human being?
Again, maybe 3 to 5. This is my best guess, so please don't hold me to that number.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Casey, Officer Egan, is away at training this week. I can certainly easily pull that data for you from our records management system and
Oh, that'd be great.
send it along.
Okay.
I will tell you, I don't believe it's a significant issue.
Yeah.
Not to diminish the fact that any bite is serious.
But it sounded like the 3 to 5 matched the 3 to 5, which would mean that in all cases, they were not restrained? They were loose? Whether in a
To the best of my
residence
knowledge,
or
none of
kids'
those
point?
animals were restrained.
Okay.
And I'm sorry to, be niggly, kind of, but just to be precise, if you have some domestic situations, you're talking about in people's houses, in people's yards, and, can you give us a sense of the breakdown of those kinds of bite versus the kind of Kent's Point bite or the, dog being walked out in the wide open air kind of situation?
I cannot,
Okay.
but I'll have it to you tomorrow.
Awesome. Okay. Does anybody else have any other questions? So, one of the things, would you like us to try to summarize back to you what we have heard to make sure that we're getting it right, or do you want to just trust our note-taking process? We'll do it either way.
I trust you. You don't have to read back everything we're just, if there's any
Okay.
sort of issues, this is being recorded, and we can
Okay.
always refer back to it.
Okay. All right, so let's move on to Wildflower Willie Atwood. Just as a matter of clarification, giving the closure of 70 Willie Atwood to dogs except during certain hours, would the police department have any reason to get involved if a person parked in the lot on Wildflower Lane and then walked their dog along the path which connects to Willie Atwood and then down Willie Atwood to 64 Willie Atwood and onto the beach portion of that lot? How about if they parked at the end of the public portion of Willie Atwood and walked from there to 64 Willie Atwood and onto the beach portion of that lot? And just for anyone who doesn't know what we're talking about, that's all here in the lot, and the parking lot that I'm talking about would be 17 there, kind of at the bottom of Wildflower, at the elbow of Wildflower. And there,
Clear that lot is DCR, state-owned?
64, to the best of my knowledge, is state-owned, yeah.
I believe we refer to that as the old Gavigan's Cottage. Is that right, Nate?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
number 7, yeah. Do you want me to, want to look at this at the same time? I got a couple of them.
If somebody parks here and walks
In the 70.
this, or
Okay.
parks like up
This is
here.
the one that was closed for parking
Wow.
because of the erosion.
Okay, but right now that's shut down, right?
The
Oh, wait a
sign
minute.
that says no dogs is
So
right
where's the
here. This was
causeway?
made Orleans
Okay,
owned.
and where's the causeway?
Closed.
Right here.
Oh, that's Wildflower.
This
That's
one
still,
was,
okay.
No,
No?
the closing sign is here.
we just
and
have the same
applies
time.
to
This is,
that.
I'm looking at this way. Okay, the wrong way. Okay.
So, this is something that Nate and I have been working on for quite some time, not necessarily related to animals, but some of the parking issues that we've had in that area. Just a little bit of history. The reason why we needed to do a better job controlling that area is because of pretty extensive damage to that causeway, which is the pathway out to that state property in the beach. Unfortunately, we had some people abusing the parking out there and doing damage to the area. So that's why we had to address that. And the Board of Selectmen also imposed some parking restrictions in that Gavigan's, the old cottages,
Yep. 17.
17,
Yep.
thank you, which would require a beach permit, a sticker, to park there, and I believe that's June 15th through September 15th. I believe that would answer one of the questions, so if you were properly permitted, you had the sticker, you could certainly park there. There's also a restriction of when the animals can be there, and there are no animals, no dogs from June 15th until Labor Day.
Well, let's get clear what "there" means in that sentence, because the sign is posted at the border between 10 and 17, and the action was taken with respect to 70. So if you're in 17 with a dog, as far as I'm aware, and, you know, I might be wrong, but there's no restriction against your having a dog at 17. Like, for example, you could just walk down the road and walk into 17 and walk around. And my question is, can you then kind of go next to 42 and head down towards 64 that way? That's the first question. The second question is, can you park down at the end of the public end of Willie Atwood Road, which would be off to the right past 30, and walk down to 64 from there? If you did either one of those things, would the police have any reason to notice?
My question would be, is 42 private property?
It is. It's a private road.
So I would not be able to authorize anyone to have access to private property.
What if the state of Massachusetts had purchased an easement, which I believe it did, but let's just take it as a hypothetical for now, because we'll get into this next week. What if the state of Massachusetts had purchased an easement along Willie Atwood and along that little curve in order to ensure that people could access 64?
Could I ask Nate to come up here and just,
Absolutely.
I just want to make sure that I clearly understand exactly the location. So,
It's time to move back door and
Yeah.
it's going through this piece of
How did you
woods.
get from
and getting onto this
17?
private road.
There's a
To
little
avoid
path that goes
having
right
everyone
here like
is there
this. It
any parking?
actually goes across,
No, okay.
Yeah.
They would park
This is
here,
a private
they
road.
let the
Okay,
dog
walk.
out and walk through.
Okay.
go private
and
road,
that's,
now
you
it's
see how
just
it's part of the same
private
thing
access.
as Willie
Yeah.
Atwood?
Walkway,
That can't
so
be
people might be referencing.
No,
Yeah.
something easement.
Actually, well,
All right, thank
I
you.
don't think that's true.
Jen,
I think you're not
Where-
allowed
where's
to
the-
park.
No,
where's the
okay.
private road, Jen?
It begins, I think, after 26, and it's actually like at the corner of my house, like Beach Plum and Willie Atwood where it meets, it's right after that. It's private road.
So
You can drive on private roads.
we would have very little impact if there was an easement given.
Yeah.
I mean, again, that has really nothing to do with the police department and
Right.
from an enforcement role.
Right.
I would think that you could lawfully use that, and then in terms of using Willie Atwood Road, that would apply,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
The easement.
Yeah.
So what are we really talking about? There would be no cars parked on, it's a private road. The way we don't respond, our authority is very limited on private roads. So we can't go out and enforce a speed limit on a private road. There's maybe one or two things that we, from a motor vehicle enforcement, that we can actually enforce on a private road. So if you're authorized to walk down the road
Mhm.
through this easement,
Yeah,
then I don't see any issue that we would have. The only thing that we would have in this particular case would be a trespassing issue. And if you've addressed that through an easement, then that no longer exists.
okay. So I know that you're just accepting my premises for purposes of argument, so
Sure.
we're not gonna say that you said anything about that, but does anybody else have anything else they want to say about this? This was not directly relevant to what we're doing tonight, it's more of next week's, but I just thought while the chief was here, if we could get his perspective on this, it would be more efficient.
I have a simple question.
Yeah.
Is this in our charge, this issue?
Yeah, I think that,
Directly,
I think the question of restrictions on wildflower requires us, is certainly something that is in our overall, it's a regulation. The no dogs at Wildflower is a regulation. It's within our charge to review regulations that affect dogs on public lands. And understanding what the legal lay of the land in the area is, I think, is essential, because I think there are some misconceptions.
And if I could just end with this, it's important to note that I think the town took the appropriate action here. We were really overwhelmed with folks using that area and parking vehicles all over the place. It became a safety issue where we can no longer have emergency access. Nate, you can certainly attest to that. So I think the board, rightly so, took appropriate action. So I don't think it was anything to limit access to dog owners by any means. It was a much broader issue that needed to be addressed.
Well, just to be technical, there were two separate items, and I don't think anybody's challenging the parking restriction on the causeway, but there was a separate item on the agenda of that meeting that was about dogs. And so that's the one that we were kind of carving out. looking
Okay,
at.
certainly.
But you don't have to go down that rabbit hole with us. I just wanted to get your preliminary thoughts. So is it okay if I go on to 3?
Just one more clarifying
Sure.
question. So the access restrictions by date are applicable for any lots 70, 64, or thereabouts?
No, the law was passed with regard to 70,
Not 64.
right?
Just want to clarify that. Nate, is that something you can speak to?
I'm gonna need clarification in terms of the restrictions for parking or the restrictions for, with dogs. You're
Dog
talking about the
access.
April 1 through Labor Day?
I thought it was June 15th through,
September 15th
September.
or something.
June 15th to September 15th?
Think so.
Okay. That would be specific to the town-owned property, out in front of 70 only.
Right.
okay.
Okay. Anything else on this item?
No, I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, no, hey.
Could,
Go for it.
as Chair, could you summarize what the conclusion is here, given
The
the question?
conclusion that I am taking away from this is that if it is true, which we're stipulating for tonight and we'll be establishing, documenting if we can next time, and I believe we can, that that 64 is owned by the state of Massachusetts, and that the state of Massachusetts also purchased an easement along Willie Atwood and then curling up to 17 next to number 42, that all of that is an easement, that if all of that is true, then there would be no reason for the police to have any interest or concern if someone were to park at 17, walk their dog onto Willie Atwood next to 42 and out to 64.
Okay, I have one clarification.
Sure.
If we see this as a parking issue, were people parking along here because they were trying to avoid paying going in to Skagit Beach?
In many cases, yes.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
So it had nothing to do with dogs, it had to do with being able to avoid that
No, I
charge.
would disagree. I think that a percentage of it are beachgoers that are trying to avoid paying at Skagit Beach. But I also think that we had a really good thing going for a period of time, and that people started cluing in that there was actually a beach in town that was dog-friendly, and there was a much more demand on that
On
piece
that
of
beach.
property, which led to parking issues, is what I brought to light.
Okay, so when you say that piece of property, you mean 70 on
70.
this map? Okay.
Where at one time you used to be able to park.
Right.
So you were getting people riding on vegetation and all that. Okay.
I see.
So we'll come back to that next week
Thank
in greater detail. Okay, so is it okay if I go on to number 4? And by the way, as minute taker,
Yep.
you don't have to get into
No,
real super
okay.
deep stuff on this,
I
just,
think you're going on to number 3, right?
Three.
I'm sorry, I am.
Okay.
Okay. Also, we've discussed the general matter of using parking regulations such as beach sticker requirements to restrict access to high traffic areas, and by that I mean high dog walking traffic areas. If such a requirement were imposed at 1 or 2 locations, okay, it's already been imposed at Willie Atwood, but for instance, Kent's or any other area of that nature, how practicable would it be for the OPD with its current staffing and priorities to enforce it?
Summertime is very difficult for us. We're extremely busy. With that said, depending on the locations, we do our very best to hire summer employees. They're non-sworn community service officers that through policy, we authorize them to write tickets. So if it was an area, Skagit Beach area, for example, that would be an area that they could reach on their bicycles. So yes, there would be more of a police presence, more of an enforcement element. Now, if you were reaching out to Kent's Point, they're not going to be riding their bicycles down Route 28 to get to Kent's Point. What I'm saying is our patrol officers certainly can enforce parking restrictions. Depending on the year, in the summertime, it's much more busy, so it would be less frequent. So, yes, we can enforce parking restrictions. There's no question. Again, summertime will be a little bit more difficult than the off-season.
Okay? Anybody want to probe about that?
We really haven't discussed that in depth at this point.
No,
really
we
just-
haven't.
yeah.
I'm just taking advantage of, I don't want to have to call the chief back and ask him questions again if I can avoid imposing on his time. Good to go to 4? Okay, barking. Turning to specific enactments, we heard you mention that you find the Orleans noise bylaw to be too vague to enforce effectively. Okay, and I've got a C dog barking thing, so right underneath the map of Wildflower, you will see both the Orleans noise ordinance and the Harwich and Eastham, which I have to admit were just randomly plucked out of, we could have taken any towns, but we took those two. And so the question is, I didn't state the question, but I lost it when I edited this, but the question is there anything in either of these two ordinances which might make your job easier? And if not, is there some specific thing that you would like to see that would make your job easier around this issue?
So, when we're looking at chapter 140, 157, that is a pathway for us to address this issue, the nuisance.
Oh,
Now, I'm sorry, did you?
I just said, because
Okay.
I was focused on 120-1.
Yeah, so under the nuisance dog, the problem is that the process is very labor intensive. It would be a matter of the police department, actually anyone can file a complaint, but I prefer when we do some sort of preliminary investigation first before we bring it to the Board of Selectmen, and there could be a hearing scheduled to address the issue. We do the same thing with dangerous dogs, and ultimately the board will make a decision on how to properly address the issue. With that said, having a bylaw where an officer could issue a bylaw citation, it would be much more immediate. If the recipient chose to pay the ticket, they could pay that at town hall, and it goes away. If they choose to opt for a district court hearing, we would submit that request to the Orleans District Court, and it'd be a matter to be addressed at the courthouse. So it streamlines the process. Which is more effective? I couldn't tell you. That would be a decision that you would have to make.
Okay, I think I had a slight disconnect with between what you're saying now, which I get, I follow it, but it's not what I thought you were saying the last time you were here. I thought you were saying that 120-1 was too vague for you to be able to use it in that kind of immediate citation writing capacity. Forget about tagging a dog, and changing its status and all that, which you would do under 140, 157.
I can clarify this. I mean, I was referring to a new bylaw, Eastham or Harwich, that you referenced in some of the material, that is specifically for barking dogs.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what I was referring to.
So-
Our current noise bylaw on the books, I've been here over 20 years, and we've never written a ticket for a noise violation with respect to a barking dog.
So would you like something like Harwich 26.5 or Eastham 17.10?
It would make the process easier. We have a pathway now through statute.
But you're talking about that whole tagging, you're talking about 140, 157 again?
Yes.
Yeah, see, I think that's a different thing, because now you're talking about a dog who does it over and over and over again. You have to show a pattern of conduct and so forth. And I'm thinking it would be good for you. I'm trying to, sort of offer you something here, a tool that you could use even if it's a dog who's here from Boston just for the weekend and is gonna go away or whatever, in any kind of it's happening right now, let's deal with it right now situation. And if the language of 26.5 or 17.10 seems to you to be more useful than 120-1, just say so and we'll recommend it.
It will be an
Oh, wait a minute.
easier pathway.
Well, sorry, I just spoke, I can't do that. We might recommend.
I don't think we should put the.
Excuse me, no, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, okay.
You're
No,
absolutely
I
right.
don't think we should put the chief in a position where what he says becomes our recommendations. I
You're,
think
you're absolutely
have to-
correct.
And
My
I,
mistake.
I certainly appreciate that. I just, we're here to enforce the laws
Right.
and local regulation.
Okay.
I'm not here to create it. I think that's a very slippery slope when you start asking your law enforcement entities
Yep.
to be a major driving factor in these things.
I really appreciate that. You know, I appreciate that you have that caution. That means a lot to me, actually. But, so we'll, after you're gone, we'll just look at that and we'll talk about it. Does anybody else want to?
Yeah, I have one thing. I want to make sure that what we do is addressing a problem. And from what I understand, in 20 years, there's never been a citation for a barking dog. Am I correct?
If I could expand on that, that may have something to do with the difficulty of applying the bylaw, which is currently on the books, or the state statute. So I'm not saying we've never responded to ongoing issues of barking animals. We have one going right now. But is it a significant problem? No.
Or if it ends up in the actual writing of a ticket.
Currently, I would use the pathway of the 140, 157 if it reached that point. I would not write a bylaw violation as it is written presently.
Okay. All right. Anybody else want to explore this any further? Yeah.
Just for clarification, because I don't want it misinterpreted from the last time we spoke. Chief, are you comfortable with the level of effectiveness in which you have availability to you right now in terms of dealing with barking dogs in town? Or do you feel like the situation with barking dogs needs to, have a stronger bylaw in place?
Most people are very reasonable. If we knock on their door and say, we've received the complaint that your dog is barking, could you please quiet your animal? 9 times out of 10, that works. Sometimes we have situations where an animal is left alone and it becomes a problem. More often than not, just by us speaking with them, it corrects the issue.
Okay.
Again, we are dealing with one ongoing issue right now that we're trying to mediate the situation. The last thing we want to do is give anyone a ticket or bring anything in front of the Board of Selectmen for some sort of punitive action. More often than not, we can mediate these situations where both parties are pleased. Did that answer your question, Nate?
That helps a lot.
What happens if you can't?
Then we would follow
You
through.
would follow through with that?
Oh, yes. Again, this situation that we're dealing with right now, I'm not going to go into details, but there's a legitimate grievance. There's no question. This needs to be fixed. We're working with both parties. They both agree, let's try to work this out, see if we can come up with a reasonable solution. If that doesn't work, then we will bring this forward to the Board of Selectmen under the state statute.
Okay. We ready for number 5?
I'm ready when you are.
Okay. I just want to make sure I'm not stepping on anybody's toes. Number 5 is really just kind of, while you're here, do you have any comments about tethering? While it didn't come up in the course of our meeting, we also wonder whether you have any issues with people chaining or tethering dogs, and if so, whether there's any inadequacy in the state law on that subject, which you'd like to see as correct.
So I did speak with Officer Egan with respect to this tethering issue. She's indicated that it is not, again, a significant problem. We will receive a complaint, rarely. There is, as you're aware, that the statute on the books presently under the 140, 174E. I don't think that this is a frequent issue that would need to be addressed by a bylaw, but that's just my opinion. Ultimately, it'd be up to you.
Yeah. Well, we're not getting a sense of that either. We just thought you might know something we didn't.
Yeah, we didn't see any significant issues, but Casey is well aware of the tethering law. I was, to be honest with you, I was educated. I didn't realize it was as restrictive as it is. I was surprised by that, but she's well aware of it.
Okay. Anything else on 5? Okay, number 6, solid waste. The fines for violating the solid waste rule are $25 for the first offense and $50 for the second offense and for any subsequent offenses. The ORTF is considering, or let's say has considered, and, you know, I don't want to speak for any individual member, the possibility of increased fines in conjunction with educational initiatives to raise awareness about the negative effects of leaving waste behind. We heard you say, and correct me if this is wrong, that the OPD is not going to look proactively for violations. It's more like if somebody, you see it happening in front of you, you'll deal with it then. Do you have any other comments about how to approach this issue or how particular changes might affect you in carrying out your mission?
Well, let me say this. I do disagree with the way you frame that to
Okay.
a certain extent. Anytime that you see an officer on patrol, in uniform, in a cruiser, we're looking for violations, we're looking for crimes, we're looking for violations of local regulations, so we're always proactive. You know, I think what I referenced, if my memory serves me correctly, is that we're not going to go out and surveil a certain location to try to look for this violation of the bylaw. But I want to be clear, when your officers are out there, we're looking for all these things, and if we see a violation, the officers will take appropriate action. If I could just expand on that. In terms of our animal control officer, Casey Egan is a patrol officer with the additional responsibility of the animal control officer. We do not have a full-time animal control officer. I'm not sure if you were aware of that or not. Casey, when she works shifts, she is part of the head count. So she responds to calls for service just like any other officer would. So I just wanted to, if you didn't know that, I just wanted to bring that to your attention.
And I want to be clear that I meant what you meant when I said not proactive. I was just, you know, compressing it probably
No
inappropriately.
offense taken.
Yeah, okay. Anything else on, do we want to talk more about 6? Okay, so now we get into more complicated things. Defining control.
I have one quick question on
Yes.
this 6.
Go ahead.
Has there ever been a fine given to anyone for not picking up solid waste of a dog?
Not that I am aware of.
Okay.
Again, I can go back, and again, you know, Officer Boucher was our animal control officer for years. I didn't run the stats. We very may well have issued a citation. I can tell you, it's not a frequent violation that we enforce.
Okay, thanks.
They're hard to catch.
Yeah, it is. It happens very quickly. All right, moving on to 7, if that's all right then. We heard and take seriously your comments about the constitutionality of trying to enforce performance-based definitions of control. By that I mean approaching people and saying, show me that your dog comes right away when you call it. We're considering a different approach to defining control, which would focus more on the owner's responsibility to prevent certain behaviors or outcomes. The language would be added to Orleans Bylaw 85-2 and would read something like this. Any dog shall be restrained or under the control of a responsible person at all times while off the premises of its owner, sufficiently to ensure that the dog will not pose a threat of harm to human beings, other dogs, wildlife, or property. Harm for these purposes includes biting human beings or other dogs, scratching human beings, whether purposefully or inadvertently, jumping on human beings, harassing wildlife, and damaging property. Before I ask you about this, let me just make a comment that this is all, I think, understood. Another thing I heard you say was that most of the time, even under the existing definition, you come in, you would be issuing a citation kind of after the fact, you know, after something had happened. And I see that as probably being still true, but this would give you a whole wider range of things that you could include so that, you know, by enforcement, you would be sending feedback from the town to people about what behaviors are okay and what behaviors are not. From a law enforcement perspective, do you have comments about this proposed change?
In terms of the, can you go review what you're expanding again in terms of
Yeah, I'd have to,
What
let's,
additional requirements?
okay, the existing law just says, all dogs shall be restrained or under the control of a responsible person at all times while off the premises of its owner. So it doesn't really, speak to kind of what the purpose of the requirement is, what kinds of behaviors we're trying to prevent. You know, and one way to try to do it is to try to be, you know, hyper-technical about what control means, and then somebody's gonna have to put the dog through some paces to try to prove that, which, you know, you raised those Fourth Amendment issues about that. The other way to approach it is just to say, look, this is what we want to be sure that you're making sure your dog isn't going to do. And if you fail, we can fine you for that, because obviously if this happened, you didn't have your dog under sufficient control. It's just one piece of a whole mosaic of trying to change behaviors, but.
So would this be another situation that it would be addressed through local regulation and not under Chapter 140?
Yes.
Okay. It sounds like it's becoming very complex to me. And I know on one hand, I'm saying having a noise barking bylaw would be helpful to us, the police department. It just would streamline the process instead of coming before the board. And in this particular case, I'm thinking that the 140, 157 makes sense. That if we have a control issue, it should be addressed by the Board of Selectmen.
May I challenge you on that a little bit?
Please, let's have it.
I think that, to me, 140, you know, Chapter 140 is about chronic dog behavior. And that's great, and we have a proposed amendment to those laws to try to, you know, kind of create a new category and give more flexibility and all that. However, you know, there's also just immediate situational kind of behavior, and, you know, if I could just devil's advocate what you're saying, it's almost, it could be taken, and this probably isn't what you mean, but it could be taken to say that the only kind of behavior we're going to intervene at all in is chronic behavior, and we're going to let individual instances go. I don't think you mean that, but.
No, we just had that severe dog bite we were talking about from 2018.
Yeah.
That was one bite. That wasn't chronic. That wasn't reoccurring, and we took action on that.
True, because that particular, when it gets that extreme, then it doesn't have to be chronic, but like a nuisance dog, you don't point to a dog who misbehaves on one day and you don't tag that dog as a nuisance dog for that, right? You have to show that, you know, the
Correct.
dog has these tendencies, right?
Correct.
So, what I think we're trying to do here is to operate in both realms, in the immediately responsive, you know, hey, don't do that, that's $50 because you did that, don't do that again, kind of situation, versus the, all right, there's something totally wrong with this situation, this dog's been doing the same thing for, you know, 100 days in a row, and we're gonna intervene and limit your rights as an owner, for, you know, require you to do this, that, and the other thing. They're two different, as I see it, things, both of which, and you have to be able to operate in both realms.
Could you give me a scenario that you feel would be a violation of the ever proposed
May I?
bylaw?
Recently, at Kent's Point, there was a couple walking their dog, and there was another group of people walking their dogs off leash, and the people who had their dogs off leash didn't control their dogs, and they attacked this other dog. The police were called. I came in and I saw the police arrive and the couple talking. And, you know, if that were a case, how would it apply, you know, what's happening to that case now? And would this have allowed the officer to be more, I don't know,
Again, streamline the process?
yes?
Yeah, I understand. I would, in any particular, and you're kind of giving me a real-life scenario here, I would want to know whether there was cooperation and agreement amongst the individuals involved, that maybe they didn't want to pursue, I'm not saying that's the case, I'm just trying to think out loud here. If they did want to pursue this because their animal had been injured, I would say that the officer should at least follow the procedures of the Chapter 140, 157, and get this in front of the Board of Selectmen. So I do understand where you're going with this, Carl. I understand. Again, it comes down to streamlining. I don't, in terms of what's reported to us, it's usually we're reactive to a bite. That's what we're normally getting called for. In this case, it was a bite on another animal.
Well, was it,
Was it?
you were there, right?
This is the incident of which he's speaking.
Yeah,
I mean,
well-
we were at basically an incident identical to that if it isn't the same one.
Was it,
Like a week ago,
About a
right?
week ago,
that was you?
probably.
Okay.
So what, can
You
we
look
just
familiar.
clarify whether there was a bite involved?
No, we weren't sure at first. Our dog is 14, but he's still kind of spry. I won't say it wasn't for lack of trying.
Yeah, okay, I just
but
wanted,
No, actually, a bite did not actually occur, fortunately.
okay. And I'm not saying, so therefore no big deal,
No,
I'm
I
just
understand.
trying to make
Making it
sure
clear that,
we
yeah.
don't say anything, we're on air, I just wanna make sure we don't say anything that isn't, technically correct, yeah.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
it's a good time. Chief, say a situation happens where there's a dog that to some could be considered not under control. The dog jumps all over somebody, possibly scratches them up. The person gets scratched, says, it's not a big deal. I'm not gonna do anything about it, try to keep your dog on a leash. But there's a bystander there that witnesses this and would like to bring this forward to the police because they feel that dog is a nuisance, even though they weren't involved in the altercation.
Yeah, this wouldn't be like your typical court proceeding that we would want to bring the victim in as a witness if they did not want to cooperate with the administrative hearing that we would have here. We could certainly still bring that forward, because it's really about not just the person that had been injured that particular time, but what may happen in the future because of this dog not being under control. So, again, that's something that we would look at, and ultimately, the animal control officer would have to determine whether or not that be brought forward. And we would need witnesses. We'd need all these things to give the Board of Selectmen the material they needed to review.
Okay, I need to parse here a little bit because I don't know if you meant to, we're back in the 4157 category of doing a proceeding before the select board. Were you asking about that, or were you asking whether they would issue a citation under 85-2 based on witness testimony of a scratching incident, even if the victim of the scratching incident didn't want to press a charge?
That's what I was asking.
That's what you were asking, that's what I thought you were asking. You clear on the distinction between those two questions?
So you were talking about a bylaw that would address this?
Regardless of how you choose to go about, what law you would like to engage with it, based on a bystander's report of something they witnessed, but they weren't involved in it.
Yeah.
Is that
I
something?
think what I'm having a hard time, what I'm troubled with is that we're really trying to change the behavior of the animal. And you can't necessarily do that with a fine. Maybe the owners become more responsive. Maybe they don't. If it goes before the Board of Selectmen, an option is to put restrictions on the animal, whether it be a muzzle. I don't know if that's right or wrong. I mean, that's not for me to decide. Mandate that the animal is on a leash. They have, a lot of authority on what they can do. So a bylaw, it may help. It makes our life easier. Here's your citation. Here you go. Is it going to correct the behavior of the animal? I don't know.
Yeah, well, none of us really know, but there's some reason why some of us think that it might.
I'll simplify this, and I know that not everyone agrees on the correct path here. I get that.
Yeah.
You want to make my life easier? Put them on leashes. And I know that a lot of you don't want to do that. I get that. But if you really want my honest answer, put them on leashes. Then we're not dealing with control issues. Trying to define control and then ask us to evaluate whether or not a particular incident, the animal was under control. It makes our life really, really difficult. But at the end of the day, it's up to you folks. We're gonna do our job to the best of our ability.
Going back to the scenario, would changes to this regulation have made your process easier? You didn't answer that.
Which scenario, the one you brought up?
Yes.
I'm sorry, you're gonna have to give it to me again.
This is the Kents Point dog attack on dog, and with the officer showing up.
Yeah, would a new bylaw make?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
Ed, can you give him the general bylaw, which was, the control definition, and then, and explain to him the added language, so I
I
kind
think,
of.
that's common sense in terms, if an animal bit another animal, the dog's not under control.
Right.
To me, that's just common sense. If a dog bites a human being, the dog's not under control. And I would take that to court every single time. It's when we have a lot of cases, folks, with this disagreement between two dog owners, and they're pointing the fingers at each other. Your dog's not under control. No, your dog's not under control. My dog's fine. And we're coming in after the fact, trying to figure out what the best course of action is.
Would it also be safe to say, for example, that, well, we've listed harm for these purposes includes a long list of things, that if we omitted something from that list, that would be a problem? It seems like control is defined by contextual and behavior versus something which is explicitly written out. There's a danger that what you've explicitly written isn't
It's a
sufficient.
double-edged sword. Having the ability to apply our definition of standard of control in a broader sense sometimes makes our job easier. Once you start specifically identifying what that is, if it's not on the list, can we move it forward? You almost need kind of a catch-all, a miscellaneous.
Yeah, we can
Yeah,
draft
you
around
know,
that. We can draft around that problem. It's a good question, but it's also something we can fix.
I brought it up just because, since we're talking about it,
Yeah.
looking at that, that's a
Yeah.
weakness.
Yeah, I agree. That's a really good point.
Could I ask a question that's
course you can.
a little bit to the side, but as a citizen, and being on like the beach, particularly the one that is at the end of Willie Atwood, which is not technically Skakit, but it's right next to it. All of the incidents that I see, and I'm there all summer, is, dogs that the owners say are under control and they're not, and it's not even just biting, it's jumping on, knocking down kids, it's, they're peeing on people's property, all that stuff. But how do you report that? Because it's usually they're like, oh, so sorry, and then they're gone. How do you get the dog, the name? How do you report it to the police? How could you streamline or make it easier for people to report incidents like that?
So it doesn't matter if we're using the 147, 140, 157, or a new bylaw.
Right.
If the individuals can't be properly identified by us, then it doesn't matter. But if you're saying that if we were able to respond and immediately identify them, and what's the best course of action? Again, a bylaw would be quick. What did you see, ma'am? Well, this is what we saw. Okay, are you willing to write a statement? Are you willing, if this ends up in district court, would you be willing to testify? Yes, I would. Here's your citation. We would do an investigation to determine whether or not there was a violation of the local code.
But as far as reporting, you call them the main police non-emergency number
Yeah,
and
you
you
gotta-
ask for.
Right, but so if the people aren't willing to even stick around to tell you what their name is, or
Hey,
the
take
dog,
pic-
you take picture, I
Yes.
mean, what's your advice?
Like any crime,
Take
get as
the-
much information as you possibly can. If you see him driving away in the car, get the license plate. Give us something to work with. If we show up and you describe what happened, and there's no way that we can identify the people, that there's really not much we can do. So we need something to go on.
Right, okay.
All right, so are we ready to move from 7 to 8, or does anybody have anything else on 7?
I just want to make one comment on this one. Scenarios are helpful to bring certain ideas to the forefront, but scenarios also are given in terms of a perception of the person who's describing it. And you'll notice in all of the American Kennel Club information that you included, it included the word unprovoked. And that, for me, is one of the crucial issues of people having different points of view on any scenario, is to determine if it was provoked or unprovoked. And it makes it very difficult and complex. So I hope when we do discuss this, we'll remember that a scenario is really very soft data that's being described in terms of a person's perceptions.
Anything else on 7? Okay, so, number 8, let me just preface, we have these two, realms. We have the bylaw citation realm, and then we have the 140-57, the dog gets adjudicated a certain kind of dog. There is a kind of crossover possibility here in the sense that you can use a bylaw to amend the state law, to amend, in essence, amend 140-57 by creating a parallel mechanism that has aspects that are not currently in the state law. And that's what 8 is all about. In other words, it would technically be a bylaw, but it would not be a bylaw that led to a citation. It would be a bylaw that led to exactly the same kind of process that you have for a nuisance dog and a dangerous dog. It just creates a third category. So this is dogs in need of training or restraint. We heard you mention that people might be reluctant to invoke the dangerous dog law because it can lead to euthanasia. We also appreciate the potential of bringing people together to discuss problems as a way of offering support to owners who have rambunctious and yet not vicious dogs. What I'm referring to there is that we talked about, having meetings at the police station with the police, with the animal control officer, and we could try, non-coercive, educational, voluntary measures and so forth. We are contemplating creating a new category of dog in need of restraint, training or restraint, to provide a less dramatic form of intervention for these dogs. So that's less dramatic than euthanasia, okay? This is not a path to euthanasia. And that removes some of the inhibition, who may not technically fit the definition of nuisance dog. Okay, these may be dogs who are not covered as nuisance dogs and, who are kind of in a gap here. In particular, this would target dogs who jump on people and could potentially knock someone down, particularly a child or an elderly person, going right to what you're talking about and going to what I myself have also observed. I think that's a real problem issue. So in this case, we're talking about, in this same document that has the picture of Willie Atwood on it, it's at the very back of that. And it says dogs in need of restraint or training. And it has, in case you're thinking this is a vast, complicated process that I've created here, a lot of this is just lifted from 4157. It's just paralleled and then modified to refer to dogs in need of, the definition's different of what kind of dog we're talking about, and it has a little more, in this first part, exhaustion of remedies, it says, any person, this is a significant difference, I think, any person may file a complaint in writing to the hearing authority, and that I have footnoted in this case now is currently the select board, although by law that could be changed in the future. Not saying it will be, but just technically, that a dog owned or kept in the town of Orleans is a dog in need of restraint or training as defined in subsection B, provided that such person has expressed his or her concerns about the dog to the Orleans Animal Control Officer. The ACO has investigated those concerns and found at least reasonable cause to believe that the dog in question may be a dog in need of restraint or training. And the ACO has suggested voluntary measures to the owner of the dog and has determined that the owner is unwilling to enact them or unable to enact them successfully. So this is basically a path that starts, it might start with me saying to, Joe over here, Joe, your dog is really, really wild. And then Joe might say, don't worry about it. And then I might go to the animal control officer and say, I'm concerned about Joe's dog. The animal control officer might come with me sometime to wherever and observe this dog. Then the ACO might talk to Joe, and Joe might blow off the ACO. And at that point, we would be into having the dog defined as a dog in need of restraint or training, and essentially, long story short, mandating that until you get this dog trained, it has to be on a leash, and it may need to have a muzzle as well. So that's the short story of this. What thoughts, if any, do you have about this?
A couple. So the authority would be the Board of Selectmen.
Yes.
And in your scenario, if the dog owner failed to cooperate with the ACO's inquiries into the matter, what could we bring to the board to support the allegation that the animal is not under control?
Well, let's say I kicked the thing off, okay, and let's say I'm the complainant, okay, so I would, upon having, and this can be tweaked, but the way it's written right now, this is what would happen. The ACO would certify to me, Carl, I tried, I didn't get anywhere. Then it would actually be me under this, although we could also give you guys the same option. I would go to the Board of Selectmen and I would say, and I would have look, I've observed this dog 12 times, and plus I've got affidavits from 3 friends of mine who say they've seen the same thing. We went through the ACO, that didn't work. I'm asking you to intervene now. Tell this owner that they've got to train their dog.
And the Board of Selectmen, if they choose to do so, could remedy this situation by many different paths?
Well, it's in D, okay? If the hearing authority deems a dog in need of restraint or training, the hearing authority will further order that the owner restrain the dog on leash and/or muzzle the dog when walking the dog on public lands until such time as the owner demonstrates to the satisfaction of the Orleans Animal Control Officer that the behavior on the basis of which the dog was designated has been appropriately ameliorated. If the ACO determines that the behavior has been appropriately ameliorated, the ACO will remove the designation. And then, in the alternative, the hearing authority may determine that the dog's behavior is the result of cruelty to animals under MGLA 272, Section 77, and may initiate proceedings for forfeiture of the dog to a society for the prevention of cruelty to animals or for the care and protection of homeless and suffering animals as provided for in that statute. That's authority that's already there, okay? I'm just telling the select board, if you can tell that this is a mess and that telling this owner, the owner's abusing the dog and telling it to put it on a leash or train it is completely pointless, you have this other option available to you.
So, here's the reality of what we deal with. We deal with conflict between individuals on a daily basis. I would be afraid that we would be inundated with complaints from individuals that had personal conflicts with another, using this as a tool. We deal with these type of issues often. I agree with you, Carl, in that, this really does kind of mirror 157. And I guess my question to you is, what would be the benefit over the local regulation over the state statute in this particular case? But keep in mind that one of the steps that we take before we request a hearing in front of the board is that we try to mediate these problems. We have those discussions like we are right now. Ma'am, we have a chronic barking dog. What can we do to try to resolve this problem? And we're working with everyone involved. So that's almost to the same extent of what we're trying to put in the language of the bylaw.
Okay, so I'll give you a very concrete answer, and then we can, all play with it and see whether, we're going down the right trail here. In the past couple of years, I'm very concerned, especially at Kent's, about Kent's, just because I walk there. Okay, so my experience is there, but I don't want to, this could be true anywhere, okay? But as it happens, I observe it here. In the past couple of years, I've seen a few large dogs who are just kind of flinging themselves around. And they have jumped on me, and I don't really care that much. But I'm imagining, okay, if I'm an 80-pound, 80-year-old 100-pound or 95-pound woman, I might care a lot, because if they knock me over and break my hip, that could be the end of, my life. So, so anyway, I have given the owners of those dogs feedback. One woman, she's a very nice woman, I don't think she had the slightest evil intent, would just say things to me like, she just wants to play, and she wasn't processing it. She wasn't able to take it seriously. Another woman told me, oh, just knee him. We're talking about a gigantic dog. Just knee him and he'll stop. It's like, well, wait a minute, this isn't my responsibility. And I think that it might be hard. I see these dogs as kind of, potential time bombs kind of, and I worry, because I do want to be able to walk my dog, about them becoming kind of the poster dog for why all dogs have to be on leash. So I'll be honest, in terms of why it concerns me, partly because I don't want to see the outcome, and partly because I don't want to see the political reaction to the outcome. So I'm not sure those dogs are nuisance dogs if they're just kind of flinging themselves around and they're only occasionally landing on a person. I think it might be easier to make the case that they're a dog in need of restraint and training. That was. I don't have the nuisance dog definition right in front of me, but my sense was, from reading it, that the definition that I had here, it would be easier to make the case. Because it's not that they're actually, barking or, it's just that looking at them, you can tell this is a risk and the owner doesn't get it.
I have the definition, if you want to.
Yeah, would you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is from what Casey provided me, so I'm not reading it from the statute itself. I believe it's the same. A dog that, by excessive barking or other disturbance, is a source of annoyance to a sick person residing in the vicinity, or by excessive barking causes damage, excessive barking, causing damage or other interference, a reasonable person would find such behavior disruptive to one's quiet and peaceful environment.
Enjoyment, right? Quiet and peaceful enjoyment. Right. And that's a technical phrase, and, as a lawyer, I'm asking myself, well, if I see this dog jumping around and he's not landing on me, and I'm sort of okay with it because I don't really care that much, it's hard to make the case that he's disturbing my peace, peaceful enjoyment. However, it's totally foreseeable to me that some disaster might lurk ahead. That's why I felt the need to write something different.
And Carl, I want to be clear, I'm not disagreeing with you. Let's just throw it all out there.
Yeah.
So my next question would be, if the police were called in that situation, and you said, this is what happened, you described the incident, clearly the animal wasn't under control, and if you wanted to move forward with it, we could file under 85 too, and give them a fine.
Yeah.
Similar to the barking. I'm not saying, again, let's go back, I'm not saying the fine is going to correct the behavior,
Right.
but it would be similar to the noisy barking dog, correct?
Again, it's difficult if the dog doesn't actually land on anybody. It's hard to get a complainant, and it's also hard to do it on the basis, if you're looking at a single incident, it's one thing. If you're looking at chronic behavior, it's something else. So, I'm kind of thinking this, I'm kind of thinking that out loud right now at this point. I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you, but I was focused in this direction because I had a concern about dogs who were chronically doing this and who weren't necessarily creating situations where anybody was gonna complain until that one time when something terrible happened.
You know, and one other point I want to make, and I know sometimes I'm overly cautious,
Yeah.
but if we left it up to the animal control officer to remove any of the restrictions that were placed on it by the authority, I wouldn't be really comfortable absorbing that liability. So, example, after the removal of those restrictions, the animal bites someone. Boy, that just landed right in the lap of the police department. I would rather have that land in the governing body of the town. And again.
So you want the ACO to have to come back here to the Board of Selectmen and say, you know, or does that make any difference? If she says, in my judgment, you know, the behavior's been corrected, and the Board of Selectmen say, okay, and then something happens, is that still the same problem?
I do not want the animal control officer making those decisions. So to answer your question, it should be the authority that would enact the restrictions or remove those restrictions.
Okay, so it would be the burden on the dog owner then to say, for instance, different scenario, I hired a professional dog trainer, I did this, I did that, and the last 2 times I went out and walked my dog, the trainer came with me, and here's an affidavit from the trainer certifying that my dog is behaving well, and we keep the ACO out of it.
The only time that I've seen where we could work around another hearing is that when that was part of the board's decision, that once or if appropriate documentation is provided to the police department that indicates A, B, and C, then the restrictions may be lifted. We have done something like that in the past. There's usually a time restriction to that. If you provide us with this documentation by this date, we will remove. If not, the restrictions will stay in place. Does that make sense?
It does, I'm not sure I like that, because if the dog's slow, you're not giving it a
Bless you.
chance
Yeah,
to,
bless you.
or if the owner doesn't have the money for training right away, you know, I feel like they ought to be able to walk the dog on a leash for a year and then do it and still have it be valid. But I think, I'm getting your concern, and I can see,
I want to keep law enforcement out of making these
Yeah.
types of decisions.
gotcha.
I want us to act as law enforcement officers and enforce.
Would it make more sense, Carl, to take the intent of dogs in need of restraint or training and in the town's verbiage about what happens when a dog is brought before the select people, that this becomes part of their portfolio of things that they can choose for that particular dog in that incident? In other words, I'm saying, you're talking about sort of a separate bylaw and process, but would it make sense to fold this into the current town regulations?
Well, okay, we're gonna have to parse here, because this would be part of the town regulations, even though it's modeled on mass, but are you saying this would be something that the police could require if they wrote a citation under 85-2? Require training, or?
There's 85 too.
See, at the beginning of this process, you know, some folks had the impression that this was gonna be simple. You know, this is really, really hard to get right.
Carl, while he's looking for that.
Yeah.
Is this in our charge?
You know, I'm just gonna say yes. Let me ask you why, is there a reason why you think it's not?
Well, I think we have a lot of work to do. I'm trying to clarify if it is. I think we have a lot of work to do, and I'm trying to balance the issues that are being brought up with our responsibility for carrying out the charge that the select board gave us. So I'm interested in making sure that what we are discussing, what we are deciding, what we will eventually put into our final report relates to the charge that we had.
Well, I think
So
the charge-
asking the question, is this in our charge, is one of clarification.
Okay,
because I think that if anything, we need to cool things down a little bit. Things seem to be pretty unnecessarily complex. And I appreciate a legal format for looking at issues, a legal overlay of looking at issues. But I also appreciate there are other ways of looking at issues.
there are, and
And these two, and all these ways interact with each other. For example, a psychological issue. The certain scenario you gave might very well suggest that someone's afraid of big dogs. I think the other scenario that Ed was bringing up was probably involvement of a little dog, not a big dog. This is a complex kind of thing, and I think we have a responsibility, if I may say again, to stick with our charge.
yeah, I don't,
If we get our charge done,
This is-
sometimes I feel that we're going in directions that are unnecessarily complex and overly detailed, to the extent that it's hard to see the connection between what we're doing and what our charge is. And that's why I asked the question.
okay, I think it's completely within our charge. I think, we are absolutely looking at all sorts of different ways of dealing with this, many of which are
It's
non-reg.
this.
The dog, the issue of dogs on public lands, or however you want to frame it. The point is, one of the things we were
Let's
charged.
just, if I may just say, see, I think the charge does frame it. And that's why I think we need to attend to our charge. I think all of us need to have our charge right before us so that we can make sure that
We were supposed
it's
to
really-
review 85-2, okay, and then it turned out that not only 85-2 is we're a regulation task force, and the other regulations that control here, apart from bylaw chapter 85, is chapter 40 of the Mass General Laws. And we can, through 85, through the bylaws, modify state law, or, add to what state law gives us as options, and that would be part of our charge of reviewing chapter 85 of the bylaws, because we don't have to just amend what's already there. We can add things, and we can use the state law as models for what we add. So, to me, it's clearly.
Not sure that speaks to what my concern was, but I just wanted to make sure that what we're dealing with is in our charge. That's all.
Okay, I think emphatically, 100%, undeniably, yes.
That's pretty strong.
Yeah, I don't think there's a shadow of a doubt. Okay, zero, which is absolutely what we're supposed
That-
to be doing.
That this,
All of this, everything we're doing tonight is right in the meat, right in the sweet spot of the charge, as far
Okay.
as I'm concerned. Okay, anything else? So I got you that the animal control officer needs to be taken out of it, and, you're raising another, I think, thorny question of, if we do this, does this become now a weapon that people who are not, people who are having problems with each other, use this device to force, here's the most negative scenario I can imagine. Somebody goes through an area like Kents Point, and basically anytime any dog approaches them, they get the person's information, and then they go out and they file, 18 complaints under here, because what they're really trying to do is make life so miserable for people whose dogs are not on leash that people will be intimidated and cowed into putting their dogs on leash, so they won't get taken to district court. That's the kind of devil's advocate argument that I can make against this, which is that sort of in the area you're talking about?
Yeah, that was my, and that's stuff we see now. There isn't a pathway right now to take this through local regulation. But we see this finger pointing back and forth from dog owners often. I'm afraid now we'll go to the next level if there's a bylaw on the
Yeah.
books.
So it might make sense to get everybody talking to each other and calm down first and table this.
Yeah, and again, we're very successful in the mediation process.
Yep.
And again, this is aside from bites, this is aside from the more serious stuff. Just more of the nuisance stuff that we normally can get in there, and most people are very reasonable, and the
Yep.
problem is corrected.
So let's go back to the thing that prompted me.
Wait,
Yeah.
a second. Again, the scenarios, if you take a psychological or sociological format to put over it, there's a little bit of a different issue. So I want to make sure I understand what we're saying right now. So let me give a scenario, if I may. 7 o'clock in the morning, a neighbor's 2 dogs bark consistently every morning. The neighbors are friendly, have a lot of respect toward each other, and it doesn't bother the one neighbor at all. Something happens, and the 2 neighbors find out that they're not so friendly as they thought they were. So all of a sudden, the barking dog that for years never bothered anyone is being reported as a nuisance. For me, this issue of permitting people to negotiate conflicts that exist among people for reasons that are not necessarily related to the dog, but can be worked out by people understanding what the real issues are, I think is a very important kind of variable that we do not lose. I think you're saying the same thing.
Yeah. All right.
I think I've been unable to find that text I was looking for, but the intent of what I was suggesting is that when a dog is presented to the Board of Selectmen as being problematic in one way or another, that by putting training as a tool first, you know, it's just a successive list of things that you want to have that the dog and dog owner to go through before you get to the euthanasia step, right? And obviously, nobody wants to go there, but if we were to emphasize training as part of that process, that might be a way to be more proactive, you know.
It's possible that that's already in there.
I think I did see language like that, but, you know,
You're looking at, you want to look for MGL 40-157,
right.
and let's come back to it, because I don't want to keep the chief here all night, but that's where it would be.
But I thought I saw it in the town site. Never mind, we can talk later.
Yeah. Okay, well, you've given us a lot to think about as far as that's concerned, and my own sense, speaking for myself, is that this is not this establishes this as not being a no-brainer, and, you know, I think what we were trying to do at this point was just cherry-pick no-brainers and push them through to the Board of Selectmen in time for town meeting if they wanted to do that. We'll come back and we'll decide that, but I mean, that's one, I'm just reminding everybody, that's one of our options, is just to defer on this one. So can we move to 9?
Can I ask just for
Yeah.
one moment of clarification?
Sure.
I heard it mentioned that in a scenario where, maybe I misheard, that a citizen could bring forward an incident to the Board of Selectmen, not going through the police route, referencing to a bylaw, and have the selectmen hear their case? Was that what I heard in terms of?
Under the state law, under 4157, yes. That's the law that gives you the option of designating a dog either as a nuisance dog, which is that whole thing about barking or disturbing quiet enjoyment, or as a dangerous dog, which is, you know, a dog who's has bitten or is, you know, seems as though he's gonna bite.
So under the state law, there is no route through the police, or they can choose not to go through.
You don't have to go through the police.
I prefer it, Nate, because
Understood.
most people aren't familiar with the administrative process in terms of giving a presentation,
And
really.
mediation that you guys provide. I think, that, something that we want to discuss
Yeah.
as a committee level is, that's really important to
Very
some of us,
interested in
that we
that.
would like to have that be the route. I would be uncomfortable, without further discussion on any recommendation that would lead to not having the police at first try to mediate these situations.
I don't know if you can, I'm not sure legally whether it's possible for us to require people, if they have a right under state law to go directly to court,
Understood.
we probably can't take that away from them.
And the bylaws would be required to go through the police?
I think you would be taking away
We
a
talking this-
state-granted right if you added that. It's off the top of my
Okay.
head. I think you're taking away a state right, and you can't do that because you're a town, you're lower on the, yeah. I'm fairly sure that's
Okay.
the answer to that.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Okay, are we good for 9 potentially dangerous dog? This is something we barely talked about. This is another approach to creating another category. I assume all the objections to 8 would probably apply to 9, because it's the same thing. It's adding a different type of dog designation. I have a feeling we shouldn't, I'm gonna suggest that maybe we not get into this unless somebody's really interested in this.
What is the issue here,
This is,
in your view?
well, the issue as to why I don't want to get
No,
deeply into
the
it.
issue of number 9.
It's just another lesser category option. In the state law, you have the dangerous dog and you have the nuisance dog. And I was suggesting coming in at this, dog in need of training, and this comes in maybe about here with a potentially dangerous dog and makes the top one a vicious dog. So it creates a little tier there that's lower. I don't think we've studied this maybe enough to really talk about it intelligently. I just had it here because it was offered to us, but if somebody wants to go into it, I don't want to shut anybody down. Did you have any thoughts about this?
Well, to me, the crux of the issue here, folks, and 85-2, restraint of dogs. If there could be a focus on that, if you could say, if you could define, right now, under control of a responsible person. Wow, that's pretty broad, right? If we can narrowly define what that is, give us something to work with, or put them on leashes. Your decision. But if we could focus on that one issue, that's really what, because the serious incidents, the bites, where people are injured, this will help us. Now, I don't want to diminish the importance of everything else you're talking about. It's important, but I think the priority is addressing the control issue. And that's what I would just ask you to focus on.
Well, we did offer that, and partly.
It's hard. It's difficult.
And partly in response to what you said about, not the inability of being able to accost people and, show that they're able to get their dog to perform a certain way. That's kind of why, I took the path that I did. So are you suggesting, what are you suggesting that's not, you suggesting you would rather, I don't even want to ask you this question because you've already said you don't want to be making laws, so.
I can say, and I mentioned this last time we met, from an enforcement perspective, it is much easier for us to identify a violation and properly prosecute that violation if there is a leash requirement. Now, I know there are many people that disagree with that, and I'm sure there are people right here that disagree with that, but trying to determine whether an animal was under control, absent a bite or something significant, is a really difficult task for our officers. And I don't have the answer for you. I don't know what the language is to clarify that, how it can be framed But I know that's our most significant challenge.
I'm gonna, you know, I'm gonna parse what, just like when you said to me that, you know, you guys are not proactive, I wanna be clear about something. It's not that I disagree that it makes your job more difficult. It's just that making your job more difficult is one of what I personally, I'll speak for myself, think are, you know, a number of considerations that have to all be weighed and balanced. So it's not that I don't get it, that would make your life a lot easier.
Yeah, and I don't mean to say it's difficult because it's more labor intensive, we have to do more work. That's not what I mean by that. I mean by, it's just difficult for us to come to a
Sure.
determination
Right.
as to whether we have a violation.
The language
Or
as
not.
it currently stands is very vague, so.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
The language is very vague as it's currently stated. It's-
What we really need, if we kept it the same, we would need to have this challenged in court. That's what we need. We need case law. Case law provides us with guidance, but we don't have that. And I can't think of anything, and we, not recently, but in the past, I've had discussions, and we tried to research, you know, what is the definition of control as it relates to animal control issues? What is it? We can't find anything.
So, but you're not opposed, I don't think, I'm hearing that you wouldn't be opposed to having us, you know, past a certain level of wordsmithing, you know, try to just get people together and have them, you know, develop a culture of consideration and so forth, which I think is a lot of what these issues really come down to.
I mean, I think that's probably the most important thing
Yeah.
that we're talking about here. And
Okay.
again, most people are just good people and they're reasonable and they're responsible pet owners. It's just that you have those few that aren't responsible and they really cause the problems, and that's why we're here tonight.
And I just want to agree with the chief. I think that we're dancing around 85-2, and I understand why. But when a regulation's not black and white, it's left for interpretation. And that's the dangerous part of the bylaw that's in place. And I think a lot of the recommendations that we considered continue, if we're gonna have a regulation in place that's left for interpretation, regardless of the amount of language you throw at it, there's still gonna be a level of interpretation that is gonna be hard to enforce, and, you know, and especially, when it's in court, and trying to prove one way or the other, so.
Has anything ever gone to court, though, around any of these things? I mean, you know,
Well, I think that's a good point.
do we really need to worry about that? I mean, I think it needs to be you've got two different emphases that you can go on with it. You can try to frame it so that the police department knows exactly what the thing is, and that an owner perhaps knows exactly what it is. Then you get into issues of, is it fair to hold everybody to that standard and so forth? Or you can go to another way of dealing with it, which is more results-oriented, realizing that most of these things most of the interventions are gonna happen after the fact anyway. It's really like, you're getting deep into some philosophy of, you know,
Well, these
law
clearly are all
stuff.
symptoms, right? Symptoms of a
But-
bylaw that's left for interpretation.
What if-
Most of these are
what
symptoms
if-
of that.
Right now, we have a very open-ended bylaw. It's open to interpretation in so many dimensions, it's funny. What if we said, there's a leash law in Orleans, and then there was a set of exceptions for that? You know, you could, you know, I'm just thinking of like other ways that we could start to approach the solution, because, you know, that's one, there's probably others.
I don't know if that would change anything in terms of the exception zones, you know, what is the rule in the exception zone? So, you can, for instance, say, look, there are towns that say, command means that the dog immediately comes back when you call it, okay? Would that change? What would that change
I
if
think
we had
that's-
that rule?
I think that's really kind of an interesting approach, almost working backwards. And again, I'm thinking, I'm not a constitutional scholar by any means, but I'm thinking, okay, so you have a leash requirement unless you can demonstrate to a police officer upon request that the animal is under control. And then you can say these methods may be used to determine that. Again, I'm not saying, it's an interesting thought, that's all.
Was that what you meant by
Yeah.
exceptions? You meant personal exceptions, or you meant zone exceptions?
I think I wasn't being specific, because I think there is, to explore it, you have to be open to the ideas of different areas. So it could be, I'm training my dog, it's on a long leash, I'm running my dog. I need it off leash. My dog is swimming, I want it off leash, So there are things which are safety issues for dogs, which are positional or situational. And then there are issues that are, social, or control related. So, but, it's an idea, it's just, let's let it simmer for a while. Maybe we can come up with something.
And by the way, I thought I heard you say something along the lines like leaving the constitutional issue aside. And, that's a dangerous phrase, like we can't ignore the Constitution.
No,
right?
no, I'm just saying that, we, obviously, from our last meeting, I'm very, very concerned. We can't just seize someone,
Yeah.
and going up to someone, and if they feel that they can't leave, for whatever reason, if there's a cruiser parked there with blue, there's many different ways the courts look at whether or not someone was seized. We have to be very, very careful in that, and that's when we talked about, the demonstration of whether an animal is under control, and we just kind of reversed that a little bit. I just think it was an interest, I think that's the way you almost have to look at these things every once in a while. Take a step back, turn it around, and what can you come up with? Not saying that's the answer.
Okay.
The surrounding towns that may have a leash law, does anyone know how they word it or phrase it? Or, do they have parks where they're allowed off leash,
They-
but if they're in town or on other properties, they're to be leashed?
I can't answer that, but I do know that there are some towns that have a law that says, that control means that the dog comes immediately or promptly or some other thing like that.
I believe DCR even has similar
Yeah.
restrictions, you have to have proof.
I just don't know.
That would be helpful.
The
Just,
dog may
just
do
that link.
that, like my dog would do it right now, but will the dog do it when there's other distractions?
Yeah.
My dog probably will actually, but I bet you a lot of them
Well,
won't.
the other thing is, does it matter if we've been down this road before, does it matter if the Yorkie doesn't do it versus does it matter if the pit bull doesn't do it?
That's discrimination by breed.
Well, but you know what? One of the things we're doing here is we're calling dogs, dogs. And actually, you're talking about animals on such a broad range that, culturally, we could have decided to give them different species names for each one, and then we wouldn't feel uncomfortable about discriminating. I mean, the dogs are so different in terms of the damage they can do, in terms of their temperament. But let's not go down that hole right now. Can we move on to 10 and just, what do you think about this dog leaving a scene of a crime?
I talked to Casey about this. So we do, lost my notes here, bear with me. There is a statute that doesn't completely address this, and I think this language is coming from a statute in Maine.
Yep.
Which proposed.
Yep.
Casey thought it'd be helpful. Like any time that we're investigating and there's a requirement, usually by statute, to provide us with your identity, clearly from an investigatory standpoint, that's very beneficial to the police officers. But if someone typically wasn't willing to identify themselves to witnesses or a victim, they're not gonna wait around for us to show up.
No, but they might drive away and somebody might get their license.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right.
Currently, the language lists a long list of someone being asked to show their dog license, is a long list of town officials, the select people, natural resources, et cetera. And my neighbor, and a friend of mine, is family was attacked on Wildflower, and when they were asked the owner to provide the information, the owner flatly refused. So I think this something along this needs to be sort of made into the regulations, because there is no recourse for an owner,
Right.
you know, to basically say, give me your license number so I can, you know, I want to pursue this. There's nothing to compel a dog owner to give it. Not that they would if there was a regulation, but.
Right, but then you can take their picture or whatever, you can identify them, and then it becomes, you know, if they get fined for it, it becomes sort of, it starts working its way into kind of the expectation of behavior that, you know, people, dog owners know they have this right to ask
Yeah.
for this, and, you know, I think, you know, it just, it creeps into people's awareness more. Okay, do you have any concluding thoughts for us then? Because we've reached the end of our list of questions.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Bon chance, mon ami.
Anyone have any parting comments for the chief, apart from expressing our gratitude?
Thank you.
Thank you for your help.
Thank you,
so
folks. Have a
much.
great night.
Thank you.
Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you.
Okay, the next item on our agenda is public comment. Typically, in town, public comment is kept to about just a couple of minutes, 2-3 minutes, but if you would like to tell us anything at this point, we'd be happy to listen to you.
Sure, do I need to go there?
It's better if you go up there because we're being recorded, and that way you're,
No, I understand.
want to tell us who you are? and-
Yes. My name's Kevin Longcart. I live on 36 Bakers Pond Road. My girlfriend and I live there. We have several dogs. We have a couple of dogs, all licensed with the town, shots, all that. We like to take the dogs walking occasionally at Kent's Point. Most of the time, it's fine, not a problem at all. We have seen a number of dogs, and I think the biggest thing I would say is the issue of control. A lot of dogs running basically, I would say, free of control. Hasn't been a huge issue for us, largely because we have a small rat terrier and a larger 40 to 50 pound lab hound mix. He's about 14 now. We don't take him very often because he's older. So normally we're there with a small dog. She's very small. Dogs come running up. I can just pick her up, take her out of danger. But about a week ago, we ran into an incident where we took the larger dog out there. We keep all our dogs are always on leashes, always under control. We took them out there. We saw several knots of dogs off leash. We avoided them. We walked around them at every opportunity until we were walking back to the parking lot down the main section. And several dogs that were down at the water, quite a distance away, came running up. I would say that's probably the definition of unprovoked. One of the dogs was very aggressive. We were basically, we were surrounded in a matter of moments by at least 4, I think actually 5 dogs. One of whom was very aggressively trying to bite the larger dog, who was understandably very anxious. We had to get out of there in a hurry. We were able to drag, I had the one dog under my arm, I had one hand free, I didn't have a lot of opportunity. I put myself between Blaze and the aggressive dog as best I could. The owner I believe it was the owner, was trying to get his dog off, but I don't believe that dog was even wearing a collar at the time, so he had almost no way of doing that. I guess what I'm saying is, I just wanted to tell my story, basically make clear that, I don't think the bulk of the dogs, we have not run into many major issues. This has been the one time we ran into this. There's been several times, I guess, things could have gone differently. Like I said, scooping up a small dog is one thing. I can't lift Blaze up and carry him out of danger. We got back to the parking lot, and I felt like, in terms of mediation, the best thing to do is to call the police. And I don't do that lightly. I do not call the police basically ever. I mean, if I called the police every time there was a nuisance, I'd have OPD on speed dial. I mean, every time a dog came running up to jump on us or something like that. we generally ignore those, but this was different. This was very different. So I guess that's why I'm here, and I just wanted to see, I heard, my girlfriend has spoken to you, Carl, and, we basically were interested in what was going on in this regard. We weren't aware that this was happening. And we've heard from a lot of people, and I can't speak for anyone else. I will say that a lot of people have told me that they have, and my girlfriend, that they self-selected out of taking their dogs, especially in that area and other areas, because of things like this. Because their dogs are too small, and big dogs come running up, menacing them, and it's a tough call. I mean, I don't want to force anything, and I'm not trying to be an advocate of throwing all dogs on leashes necessarily, but I am saying control is a serious issue. And I'm saying that a lot of people have a very optimistic, I feel, opinion of how good their control is. We had a dog come up to us we went again this last weekend, because we don't want to stop going. We don't want to be one of those people that self-selects out. But there was a dog that came up to us, and the owner said, "Oh no, don't worry, he's friendly." And his hackles are raised. I don't think the owner noticed it. I don't think all dog owners know the body language of dogs when they get like that, and they're animals. And I don't blame the dogs. I don't want to blame the dogs. I don't want to see anything happen to them. I feel like this is an owner thing. I do feel like this is an owner situation. If the dog's under control, the dog's under control, and we don't have this situation. As I said, we were very far away. This situation came to us. And I was kind of hoping maybe I'd see more people here, but it's not, based on the reaction that we had when we told our story. But, it just seems to be that seems to be the option, and we keep getting told, just don't take the dog there. Or, we got one that said, that was the dog hurt? And fortunately, he was not. He's kind of fast for 14. But he easily could have been if we didn't pull him out of there fast enough. And, or one of us, or the owner, for that matter. It could have been anybody. But fortunately, it was not in this case. But I just feel like, that's this time. We didn't want to hang around. I don't know who these people were. The officer came, took our statement. She said that she was going to go down and talk to them. And as a matter of fact, the last thing I'll say is that the officer said to us that this is why she doesn't take her dog there anymore. And that was kind of an eye-opener. But that's my story, basically.
Okay. The format generally for public comment is that, we just kind of listen. So the fact that we're not engaging you is not indicative of a lack of interest, or, I think we're paying close attention to what you're saying, but.
I feel that way too, fully understood.
Yeah, okay. But we're pretty much in receive mode in this particular format.
I understand.
Okay.
Can I ask a question though?
Yeah, sure, if you want to.
Maybe I missed this. Did the dog jump on your dog?
He started trying to bite. It was snarling and trying to bite our dog. There were 3 other dogs that came with it, and I feel like they were kind of drawn. I don't know if they were together. They may have been a separate, they may have been just playing together. They may have known each other. They may not. I don't know. But they were surrounding us, so it was very hard to get out. There was one dog that was hyper aggressive, snarling and biting at our dog.
What color?
Oh, it was like white. I think it had a brown patch or two. It was sort of a collie mix, like a border collie mix. I couldn't be absolutely sure. One thing I will say that it does make it difficult. 2 things, I guess. It's all one thing. We didn't want to hang around, I think, for a couple of reasons. One, we wanted to get the dogs out of there, because the dogs being there together was causing the problem. So it was very hard to get any information or anything like that. And I think the other thing is, the last thing I think that was probably the reason why we called the police was because it's better for them to mediate than us trying to have some one-on-one conversation that could easily go very badly, depending on their reaction to what had happened. Because their perception of the incident may be different, I guess. It's their dog, they may see it a different way. So we didn't want to stay around to mediate this in person in the woods. We just kind of got ourselves out of the situation and call for someone, hopefully just talk to them or something like that, but it was a tough situation. Everybody was very shaken up, so,
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, sorry to hear.
Would it have made a difference if you had been able to ask for the dog owners or the dog's information to you?
I don't know. I don't know them. We had not, I don't think I've ever seen them before.
In the situation, it probably didn't seem appropriate,
I think the best thing to do, that's what I'm saying, I think the best thing that was done in the situation was getting everybody separate, getting everybody apart. The owners, I will say that there wasn't any way, like, we got out of there. Those dogs were not restrained ever. We just got ourselves out of there, away from them. So I think it would have been I don't know if it would have done anything. It could have made things better, it could have made them worse. I just don't know. And I just certainly didn't want to make it any worse than it already was.
Thanks. Appreciate your coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, what I'm gonna try to have us do right now is see if we can just find the few nuggets of anything that we would want to pass on. I think, we have, and that takes us to this last piece, which is the findings and recommendations. There are a bunch of possibilities here, okay? If you open that packet up, there's a preamble in the front, and then there's these finding and recommendations. We can just cross some of them off and just not, or what we can also do, we can say nothing, or we can say, well, we talked about doing this, and this is what we were hoping for, but it just proved to be very complicated, and we're not in a position to recommend. That's a possible thing that we can do. Or we can just not even talk about it. But again, just to give context, there was an ask at the very beginning of this whole process that if there were any regulatory changes that we could recommend in time for town meeting, that we try to do that. It was a tough deadline to make. We started this in October. It's way more complicated than it might have seemed. So I don't feel like we have to force it. But if there's anything here that's an easy pass along, I'd like to try to do it. So,
I want to make sure I
Yes.
understand what we're doing.
yep,
Is there something in our charge that says that we should get things to them in a certain time? In
when,
addition to the interim report, which I know it was a date.
okay, the short answer is basically yes. The details of that are, it's not so much that it in the charge, I think it says to give them what we have by January 1. And then,
Is the interim, yeah.
and so then in the course of conversation, this may have been a meeting that, I don't know if you attended or not, I don't know, I can't recall. We had a conversation with Mr. Runyon, and we indicated that, it was gonna be essentially impossible to get any kind of rulemaking recommendations by January 1. And we asked, what is the real kind of pragmatic drop-dead date for getting recommendations? And he told us the end of February. In some other context, I know I heard the same thing from John Kelly face-to-face. It must have been at the very first meeting when we all assembled for the first time. And since then, Mr. Kelly sent out a thing to all boards, which Nate emailed to you after one of these meetings, either the last one or the one before, saying, February 24th, which is today. So what I'm trying to do is to see whether there's anything that we can pass along tomorrow, essentially, or worst case, next Monday, that would, but tomorrow preferably. And we have kind of referred to that as the process of kind of hunting for no-brainers, things that are not so complex that we need to you know, that we can come to some kind of clear statement today. So that's what we're doing.
Thank you.
And we would then either send that separately, or we would just amend our interim report and add it as a section inside that interim report, which would then put it all in one place. So as far as barking dogs go, if it's okay, no, go ahead.
Just a question in terms
Sure.
of additional meetings, et cetera.
Yeah.
What happens after today?
Well, we meet on the second, and the highlight of the second is, under our current schedule thought, was that we would hear from Nate about
Okay.
Bayside access. And then, so we'd also be talking about the difference, you know, the 64 and the easement, you know, 64 Willie Atwood, the easement along Willie Atwood Road, all of that. And Skakit as well, and the history of the Skakit restriction and the reasons for Skakit and wildflower restrictions and all of that. That's the highlight of March 2nd. After that, we're back to our normal schedule of first and thirds. And I have floated, I'm not gonna be here the 17th, I've floated the possibility that since we have worked so hard recently, we could take that off and go back to first and thirds starting in April. Or we could even slow it down further if we want. I mean, we can do whatever we like. We've done a lot of work.
There's no end date.
There is no end date.
I thought it was June.
You mean the end date of
The committee.
our existence?
Yeah.
Ed? I would assume the end date of our existence is when we turn in our report.
Yeah, yes.
I think it's June.
I have a question. Where, did we make a decision to resurrect the interim report, or is that something? I'm just trying to figure out why we wouldn't start packaging things up for the final report.
What do you mean by packaging them up for the
Well, I
final
mean,
report?
you know, I think that, some thought process would be to include all of our recommendations in a final report.
Yeah.
As a product of, you know, these meetings.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to figure out why we go back to the interim report and,
The only reason to add whatever comes out of this to the interim report is to have a single, you know, a single product rather than two separate products. For instance, if anybody says to us, asks us, or if we want to say to the world, this is what we have done so far, I think it's just kind of more intuitive to put that in a single document than it is in two. You know, here's our interim report, here's our second, you know, legislative, it's kind of like, why not just have it all in one place? That's my thought. It's not saying it's right, but that's why it occurred to me to do it that way. Because, you know, it's harder to get people to focus on two items. And according to Dave Courier, the last time I talked to him, John Kelly had not yet even given our interim report to the Board of Selectmen. So if they haven't even seen it, seems like, why give them two separate pieces of paper or bunches of paper?
I wonder if we could get to these findings and suspend the idea of if we should add to the interim
It's
or
fine
if we
with me.
should create a report. Because for me, there will only be one report, and that report is the final report.
That has
The
nothing, the
interim-
final report has nothing to do with whether what we give them, let's say tomorrow, if we give them something tomorrow, comes as a separate document, or whether it's nested in a
But I
resubmission.
think the question was about the assumption that we would be adding to an interim report. And what I'm saying is that, for me, there's only going to be one report. I don't
It's only gonna be
I
one
don't buy the
final
idea
report.
of, yeah, it's just a little suggestion, Carl, just a little suggestion.
I just don't
That
think we're
I
understanding
don't
each other.
think, I don't think the idea of two reports as a rationale holds for me. Our final report will be our report. The interim was just to inform people where we were at that time. We
Right.
now can write a final report. I don't think it has to follow the format of the interim report. So
I never
why
said.
don't we get on with this? and
Okay, I just want to say this, okay? There is complete failure of communication and understanding right here. So, from my point of view. So, I understand that you don't want to dig into it right now, but we're not on the same page, we're not talking about the same thing. There's a complete disconnect.
So you're open to the fact that there wouldn't necessarily have to be a format of the interim report for our final report?
I never even said that.
Okay.
That's never been on the
Okay,
table.
That's good, we're communicating then. So our final report, we can create it in terms of any kind of format that we choose.
Certainly.
Okay.
And that has nothing to do with whether this gets bundled into the interim report or stands alone as a separate piece of paper. That's what we're talking
Well,
about.
that seems to bring up the other issue of us turning in information for an article. Is that what you're saying? That this-
Yeah.
Well, we haven't even decided if we want to do an article.
Right, no, I know, it's out of sequence, this is out of sequence, we're ahead of ourselves. Yeah, okay,
I just
so,
want to ask one other thing. Isn't it possible, I mean, I always just look at an interim report as an update. So it's possible that we could have multiple interim
Yeah,
reports, right?
this
Like
could
we
be
could
the
have another update in a
this
month
could be
or
the
two.
second interim
Right,
report, there
yeah.
could be a third interim report,
Okay,
yep,
got it.
yep. And it's not like a big deal which way we do
Right,
it.
yeah, right.
Okay, so, one, barking dogs. Do we want to try to, I thought I heard the chief say that if there was a barking dog ordinance, it might be helpful. Do we want to try to recommend a barking dog ordinance at this stage? We can either do nothing, we can forward, we can decide on the Eastham or Chatham or some other version that we create, or we can just punt this down the road to the final report, because we're deciding it's not high priority and not worth spending our precious time on tonight. So do we want to try to craft a barking dog recommendation right now is the question.
Well, it would make it easier for him.
That's
Right.
not necessarily what I took for notes on. I felt like he had said it wasn't that big of a problem, and I asked him if if what he had in place, he was comfortable with it as far as enforcement goes. I thought the answer was yes.
Yeah, I thought he was saying that I wrote down 9 out of 10 times they complied.
And I said, well, what happens number 10?
Okay, I'm not trying to kind of like override you here, I just want to be clear about a consideration that, it's 7:30, we're going to be here till a certain point. If this is high priority, I think we should do it, but if we don't do it right now, that's not saying we're not coming back to it, it's just saying we're not sending it along right now. That's not to
Yeah.
twist your arm into not doing it, but I just want to be clear that it's a good thing, we still could decide to do it later, or do it now.
But you're saying that anything we agree to or want to has to be drafted, crafted
Well,
physically.
pretty much now, if it's gonna go to a warrant, if it's gonna have any chance of going to a warrant.
Right, okay.
And so there again, the importance of the rule might play into that, because this doesn't, I don't hear the chief saying, I really need this, I really hope you can get this on the warrant.
I heard the chief say he wanted one thing,
Hmm.
and that's a leash law,
Control.
Yeah,
control.
Or
Control
clarification of
Control
85.
defined.
Not necessarily leash law, but clarification.
Yes, thank
You
you.
said that would make it easier.
Well,
You didn't necessarily.
He said,
See,
please
I'm-
focus on that.
Yeah.
yeah.
Please
Carl, if I
focus.
may, I'm a little bit uncomfortable with having the chief be the motivator of what we do at this point. He was here to provide us on 2 occasions with information, answered 10 questions. I think we have to own what we're going to do now.
Yeah, I
And it's not what the chief told us, it's what we want to do at this point.
Right,
And so, because I don't think it's fair to put the chief in the position of our recommendations going forward based on what he said.
okay,
It should be what we say.
I agree with that.
Okay. So for me, I would pose, I'd be comfortable putting the barking dog issue in the final report.
So would I.
I agree.
I agree.
So move to defer the barking to the final report?
Yeah.
Sure. Yep.
Second, are you gonna vote, or are we just gonna kind
Aye.
of go by
Consensus.
sense of consensus? Okay, great. So how about chaining okay, so that's going in the final, we're not dealing with it now. chaining or tethering dogs, does anybody feel like that's something we should be working on right now? This evening? My sense was that he didn't,
Didn't seem
he had
to
it
be.
very low priority. Yeah. So can we punt that to the final and maybe not even do anything about it at all at that stage?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Final, maybe nothing is my note for that. Okay with everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, solid waste removal. So I had this drafted so that we report out what we have kind of learned about it.